Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face / garage / craft studio. Yeah, welcome. Today's card, or this video's card, because I will most likely be having multiple videos go up over the next few days. Barring, all the tech issues I've been dealing with lately. Anyway, I recently received the Tonic Tim Holtz Media Surface Matte. This thing is big. They released this a couple weeks ago, longer, I forget. It was recent. Simon Says Stamp sent this to me, which I was excited because I was gonna order it anyway, because we all know Tim Holtz releases something new, add to cart. If it's a surprise, like the new colors or whatever, add to cart. Sight unseen. We don't care. So anyway, this thing's big. Like, I knew it would be, but like, it's going to take up the whole screen. So I'm not going to get into a full review or anything because honestly, I feel like I'd be redundant if I did. And if you go to Tim Holtz's channel, he has an entire video that he did when this came out and explains the thought process behind it, how it works, yada yada yada. So I feel no need for me to repeat everything he has already said. Yeah, it is sized to fit the Tim Holtz glass media mat, which I do have. It's just sitting underneath things, but you don't need the glass mat to use this. You can just slap it onto your work surface. That's what I plan on doing with mine. And yeah, I like the size of it. I have the other sizes because there's the little mini ones that Tim Holtz had specifically for the glass mats. They're for, the corners. I have those ones that I'll use for when I'm doing little smaller projects. I have the larger ones that don't have the little weighted corners. And yeah, they're great for doing the inky, painty, smushy, messy stuff. And yeah, I thought I'd mention it before I start the video. I'm not 100% sure what I'm doing at the moment. Have a rough idea, as always, in the back of my mind. I was spending a good chunk of time today outside. I was pulling weeds and planting some things and just, getting messy, and now my back hurts because, hunched over doing all that stuff. So now I'm going to sit and work and make something and share it with you guys. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to follow the current color throwdown challenge, which I am late on as always. Story of my life. For those not aware, the color throwdown challenge, it's just a group of us that do this for fun. It's been going on for years and years and years. We're into the 700s of challenges. That's how long it's been going on. There's a new one every week. So yeah, it's been going on for over a decade. Well over a decade. Every week there's a new one. Every Wednesday morning a new challenge goes live, and there's a little link doomahickey. People can add their creations, and yeah, it's just fun. So I always have a link to that in my blog post, which is linked directly below the video when I'm playing along, which is supposed to be every week, but again, life. So I will have a link to that, and you guys can just check it out and play along because it's fun. It just gets, especially for someone like me, I find it just gets me thinking outside the box in terms of color combos, because I'm always like fuchsia, celery green, purple, rainbow colors, colors of the rainbow, always, that sort of a thing. And it's nice doing the challenge, and it's like, I would never have thought to put those colors together. And then I just start thinking. So stay tuned and we shall see what I make. So I went mixed media because I had the new mat, which took the backing off, stuck it to my work surface, and then I pulled out a couple of distress paints because I need to use these more often. I have purchased pretty much all of them. And it's like, I like them. I need to use them. So this first little bit, I just used spun sugar and Lost Shadow Distress Paints. And I just put kind of drops of them onto the surface, added a bit of water. And then this is mixed media HEAVYSTOCK, the white HEAVYSTOCK. And just kind of did basically kind of like ink smushing, but with paints. So could you do this with inks? Totally. You'll just get a different look. Different mediums do different things. Just use what you've got, you know. They all act differently, different cardstocks, all the things. So paints, because they're paint, sit more on the surface, whereas inks are going to soak into the cardstock. That's why I kind of went with paints, since I'm using these two very, very light colors, and I wanted it to sit more on top, and they don't mix as much. You can get the paints to, you know, mix and blend and do things, but you need to add more water, and, you know, I didn't want that. I wanted them to kind of, to still be able to see, you know, you can still see the gray, you can still see the pink. They aren't just like blending into a pink tinted gray, you know, but there ain't nothing wrong with that either. So I mushed around, you know, ended up creating two backgrounds. That wasn't my original plan. I was only going to make one card, and it evolved into two because why not? And then I sped up the drying process with my heat tool. Not necessary, but I wanted to get these dry so I could go on to the next step, which is the FANFARE stencil from Simon Says Stamp. I have used this many times in many videos. It's just a favorite. And I genuinely love the fact that it's a 6x9 stencil. So I can do things like this. I can do 2 card fronts in one pass. Love it. So I still have a bit of pixie spray on the back of that stencil. So it's got a little bit of stick to it still. So that's also perfect. So I just literally slapped it on those backgrounds. And then for the stencil paste, I'm using these Picket Fence Paper Glaze Luxe. Again, I've used these colors before. The light pink is Cherry Blossom. And then the medium shade is Pink Magnolia. And they're gorgeous, and they have glitter in them, and they're beautiful. I was talking to Ricky the other day, you know, Romero cards. And he's like, they're paste. He's like, you just kind of want to eat them. And I'm like, true, but we need to abstain from that. Don't eat the paste, kids. Just don't. Even though they do look yummy. Anyway, they do. They look like icing. I mixed the two together, back to what I was doing, just to get a slightly lighter shade of pink. The one was too dark. The other one was a little too light for my, you know, what I was going for. So I just mixed them together on my work surface with my little palette knife, applied it over the stencil, and then with any paste, but especially glitter paste and that, I immediately clean off my tool, my stencil. I either set it in a container of water or wash it in the sink. I just use a bit of soap, wash them up, good to go. So I set those backgrounds aside, and then I die cut more of that mixed media HEAVYSTOCK. This time I used the etched layered daisy wafer die set, one of my favorites. I've also done a bunch of videos using this one too because I love it. So I started with that. And for the stems, I used iced spruce and peeled paint distress inks. I wanted to keep the greenery fairly subtle, since I'm staying kind of true to the color combo, which for this challenge, it was craft, gray, pink, and white. So I wanted my greenery not to be super intense. So ice spruce is just fabulous because it's like that grayish, gray blue tinted, slightly green. Like ice spruce is just a gorgeous color. I say this a lot more recently because it's one I pulled out. You know, you go for a long time, you don't use a certain distress color, and then you pull it out and it's like, oh, why have I not been using this all the time? So I use that with a little bit of peeled paint just to get a little more green. And then I just literally was like, you could see me just tapping the die cuts like into the ink that I had added a little bit of water with, like spritz it with water. So just ink smushing in the most fun way possible, really. And then for the actual blooms, I used Lost Shadow Distress ink, mush that onto the media mat, and then I'm just picking it up with my little water brush and just lightly painting it at the base of each petal on these die cuts, just slapping it on. You know, it's just going to give it that little extra something. I mentioned this in a recent video when it comes to like white florals or just anything that you want to be white. You know, I'm just thinking like Santa's beard, you know, just different things that you want white. You need to add a bit of shading to it. It makes it look more white in the end. You know, there's always shadows, depth. I say this, and again, I don't follow any of the rules. I rarely, you know, light sources and all those different things. But things like adding a little bit of shading, adding a little bit of this, a little bit of that, it helps. So I did that to the blooms. And then I had also die cut from HEAVYSTOCK the layered Warbler wafer die. And at the time, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with him. But I had all that ink sitting there. So I just started same thing, ink smushing the die cut pieces into that lost shadow. And then I added a vintage photo just right in the middle of that, you know, area where the lost shadow was, because I don't care if those two mix. And first I painted the centers of those daisy die cuts with the vintage photo. And then I mushed the remaining kind of die cut pieces for these little birdies into that ink as well, because why not? I've mentioned this in previous videos. I avoided for literal years, I avoided using bird anything. Like if a stamp set came out, dies, everything, anything to do with birds, I just stopped. I just didn't use them because I don't know. I got really hung up on you know, they need to be realistic and all those sorts of things. I don't know why. I literally, and I am living proof of what I always say to you guys. Do as I say, not as I do. I got really hung up on it. But at some point last year, finally got over myself, started using birds and slapping them onto cards. And now, you know, look at me now. Like, try and stop me. Like, birds go on everything. Just slap a bird on it, if you know that reference. It's actually a show I've never watched. I've just watched that skit and it lives in my head rent free. Every time I pull out bird themed anything, I'm like, just put a bird on it. Anyway. Assembled my little daisies. Because once they're together, the two pieces, they're so cute. I love them. Again, when I did a Halloween card. Was that last year? I think it was last year's Halloween series. I did a Halloween card with those. I did them in like orange and purple and stuff, and they were fun. So, did all of that, and then I wanted to add a little bit of pink because why not? Why not? So I took spun sugar, distress ink, stuck that on the craft mat, added a bit of water, and then lightly mushed the body of the bird into that, added a little pink, and then I was like, the ink is still sitting here. Let's add it to the flowers too. Why not? Why not? So I just did sort of the same thing, just kind of tapping them. So you get little splotchies and splatteries of that pink ink on the petals. And yeah, I was enjoying myself. There is something about just mucking around and ink smushing and splattering and pastes and all the things. Like I had fun. I really did. So after I had, all the ink wiped off, so I'm not getting it everywhere, I assembled these little birdies, and they're super, super easy to assemble. With any of these ones, because there's several that Simon's released over the last however long, you know, I've used several of them in my videos, and I just follow the packaging. There are also like etch lines in the die cuts, so you can tell where like things line up, and especially ones like this, it's so simple. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. So for the little tiny pieces, like the little dots for the eyes, rather than run it through with like a scrap of black cardstock, I just took the ones that were cut from the HEAVYSTOCK, and I just tinted them with a dark Copic marker. I think this was like a W10. So there's a really dark gray. Black works too. It's fine. Oh, and for the daisy centers, I'd also used a Copic marker, E29. Any dark brown marker would work. I just used it to add little dots. Again, just texture, you know, it just gave it that little extra something. So, and then assembling everything, I'm using just craft tacky glue. That little bottle is a Gina K like precision bottle that I filled with craft tacky glue a few months ago. And I'm loving it. This thing has not clogged on me once. Not once. Like I'm very impressed. I like this bottle. Yeah. So that's what I've been using now for however long. And then the other thing was using my little embellishment wand to pick up the really small pieces to press into place when adhering everything. And then the next step was die cutting. I used the Fancy Thanks wafer die. And I die cut that from scraps of Nina Desert Storm cardstock. One of my favorites. It's my favorite craft cardstock, with the exception of craft heavy stock from Tim Holtz. That stuff is... I save that though for when I'm doing, the inky, painty, water heavy techniques, that sort of a thing. For everything else, I use Nina Desert Storm. It's just a go-to. I just love it. So I die cut from that. 3 layers, adhered them all together with the craft tacky glue to give it the dimension. And then I also pulled out one of my paper pouncers, and I'm going to use that same vintage photo distress ink. And I'm going to pounce that onto these die cuts, keeping the ink more concentrated towards the bottom. So it gives it that little bit of an ombre look, and it just gives it that extra something. So I go over a couple times along just the bottom of the die cuts, and then just kind of let it basically fade out towards the top as there's no ink left on the pouncer. So I'll do that to both of these die cuts, and it will, the distress ink will dry back a little bit, but it just also brings it more in line with the vintage photo that I used on the birds and on the flower centers and that sort of a thing. So applied that to those die cuts. Once that was done, off camera, when those backgrounds that I had stenciled at the beginning were dry, I die cut those with one of the nested domed arches wafer dies. And then I had taken another piece of Desert Storm cardstock, and I cut it to slightly smaller than what my card bases will be. So this is roughly like 4 inches by 5 1/4, something like that. And I adhered the stencil background to that. Again, craft tacky glue. In fact, I use craft tacky glue for everything other than the bird and a couple of the daisies. I'm going to use some foam squares. So I'm going to put the stems in place with craft tacky glue. And you can see at the top of the screen there. This is also why I like doing more than one card, because I use the first one as a template. So I had laid out everything, the stems and the flowers and the sentiment, etc., etc. Had it all laid out. And I was like, okay, I like how this looks. So now I'm just going to copy it onto this other card, get everything adhered, and then off camera, I'll adhere everything fully down to the first one. So that it just gives me more time to fiddle and figure out. And then on camera, the professional me can just lay it all out and adhere it all at once and look like, I know what I'm doing. But trust me, I'm knocking things over and breaking things and swearing and making a mess. And half the time forgetting whether or not I'm even filming or on screen, because I'm a professional. Anywho, I originally adhered everything with just craft tacky glue, but the bird I wanted to pop up with just some thin foam squares. And those are those huge Hero Arts acrylic blocks. I've shown these in several videos. I bought them a couple months ago, whenever it was. I have a couple of them, and I use them just to weigh down things when I'm adhering. And yeah, the bird, pop that up with just a thin foam squares because I wanted them standing right on top of the sentiment. And then I also decided these 2 other daisies to add a foam square to the back of them just to adhere them even better, because I got so much texture going on between the die cuts, the stencil background, etc., etc. So I just popped those little foam squares into place and then popped those daisies right on top. And once I got those adhered, I did the same thing to the other card front, and then flipped those over and just trimmed off just the stem that was hanging over the edge. I made sure kind of everything else wasn't going to go past the card base, although if it does, I just trim it off. Your eye fills it in when it's looking at it. But anywho, after I got everything adhered, of course I'm going to add splatter. It just needed it. So white gouache, as always, stuck that down, took my little fan brush with just a little bit of water to thin the gouache down a bit so that I could get a good splatter consistency, and then splatter this all over both of these card fronts. It just adds that extra something that I love. So did that, set those aside to dry. On the insides of my cards, which are going to be top folding A2 white note cards, I'm going to use that FANFARE stencil again. I taped it into place with just some pixie tape, more so also to mask off so I don't get ink past the stencil. And I just used the spun sugar distress ink and my little paper pouncer to add that to the inside of the card. So it just repeats the pattern, adds a bit of color. You guys know I gotta have something on the inside of my cards. They feel very naked without, you know, they gotta have sentiments, some color, anything. So added that, and then I pulled out the Greetings Mix 1 stamp set. I kind of alternate between that one and there's the Greetings Mix 2 set I've been using in a lot of recent videos. They're just favorites. Great variety of sentiments, come in so handy. So I chose a sentiment from that set that I wanted to stamp on the inside of these cards. And I put the card bases into my Mini Misty, lined up my little sentiment here, and that I'm just going to ink up with Vintage Photo distress ink as well. I don't often use distress inks for actual stamping. That's not what they're formulated for, and they aren't the greatest for stamping. However, sometimes it just works, and these sentiments were fine enough. If they were like larger, solid, you know, thicker areas, I wouldn't have used the distress ink. I probably would have used either the distress oxide ink or just a different ink altogether. But it worked, so we're good. And then as a final little bit of embellishment, after I adhered the card fronts to the card bases, I've got these little Trinity stamps. These are flushed cheeks embellishments, just a little confetti. So put a few of those onto both of these card fronts and then adhered them into place with dabs of craft tacky glue. And that finished off the cards. So I had a load of fun making these, just mucking around with all the different things. And yeah, as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. In the blog post, there'll be a link to color throwdown challenge. There will also be picture links to all the supplies I used, so you can check that out below if you are interested. The supply list will also be in the description box below. And yeah, thank you guys so very much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping and commenting and informing the robot overlords that you guys are liking what you see. I very much appreciate it. And subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.